Welcome everybody to the December 2018 edition of Consciousness Hour. I'm really excited about this particular discussion today because it's a kind of almost a two-part interview in the sense that we interviewed our present guest's associate author for a wonderful book called Transcendent Mind, Dr. Imants Barušs, a few months ago, and we had a fascinating discussion because he had a group of students with him as well, so there was quite an interesting kind of level of discussion as well. Now, I want to move straight into the work that Dr. Julia Mossbridge has been doing, because she's a name that I have known for many, many years, and it was probably around about 18 months ago that I came across her book Transcendent Mind, and I can't remember if it was Julia or Imants that actually sent me a copy of the book. But I've now read it, they've just recently read it for the 4th time. I find it such an incredible piece of work, and it resonated so strongly with me because many of the ideas that I've been playing around with in my own writings, these guys were doing the really hard science of. And so without further ado, I'd like Julia, if she would like, to introduce herself, a little bit about her background, how she's ended up where she is, how she is a researcher with IONS and various other organizations. So just a little bit about your background, Julie. So for the listeners and the watchers here, if you can tell us a little bit about yourself, that would be really great.
Sure. If I go on too long, you'll let me know, yeah?
Yeah, I will. I'll jump up and down or something.
Yeah, good, okay. Yeah, so I've always, my work has always been a struggle to unite these two parts of me that, maybe unite is not the right word, to have a conversation between at least these two parts of me. One which is focused on more like, well, let me put it this way. When I was a kid, I was asking myself, I knew I wanted to be a scientist. I knew I wanted to be a writer. And I thought those were different things. Turns out they don't have to be different things. But I also had this urge to be something like a rabbi or a politician or someone who brought change into the world in some kind of way that was spiritually connected. And in my mind, because I was young, I thought that politicians could do that too. So, and I think it's possible, but far off of what we have now. And anyway, so I pursued science. I pursued writing. And I pursued spirituality, and that's the long and short of how I got to where I am now. So my science background is largely tier 1 academic institutions. Like I went to Oberlin College and graduated with highest honors in neuroscience, and then went to UC San Francisco in neuroscience, and then left with my master's when I had a feeling that they weren't. It wasn't a feeling; it was a knowing that they weren't. I wasn't in resonance with I didn't feel simpatico with the program, which felt very materialist. I didn't know the name materialist. I didn't know I just was an uncomfortable feeling of, wait a minute, they're thinking about the mind in a way that's different from how I'm thinking about the mind. And that's fine. It's great for people to have different opinions, but the way that I was thinking about the mind wasn't kind of allowed. So then I took about 5 years off of graduate school, had my master's, didn't do much with it, tried a bunch of different careers, and then got sucked back into science because it's by nature. And started studying marine mammal communication at the aquarium, not in any kind of academic program, but just because I could. And then decided to get my PhD in psychoacoustics, the psychology of sound perception, at Northwestern University. And then did my postdoc there in a cognitive neuroscience lab. So, and then spent about 8 years being trained as a cognitive neuroscientist. So I never know what to call myself. I sometimes call myself a cognitive neuroscientist and experimental psychologist. Sometimes I call myself a futurist because I'm keenly interested in the future. And for the last 12 to 15 years, I've had a strong scholarly interest in, and an experimental interest in understanding precognition, getting to know about future events that should not be predictable according to a sort of a traditional materialist view, or forget materialism, just the traditional scientific view. And forget that because that's misunderstood. So frankly, the whole should not be predictable is just false, and that's why it's in quotes. But then since I was a kid, I've been having precognitive experiences. And so that's what drove me towards, I believe, who knows, right? I really don't. I mean, the real answer of why anyone gets anywhere is because that's how the universe put them in the world. But my story is, since I was a kid, I've been having these experiences, and then at some point I decided to use the tools that I had to investigate them.
So in terms, it's interesting because my background is social sciences and sociology. And I found it was quite curious in my academic career that the materialist reductionist viewpoint was even more profoundly ingrained within the social sciences in many, many ways. And I specialized in the sociology of belief, the sociology of language, and the sociology of knowledge.
Okay.
And it's interesting you're making the point there that you found the similar kind of constrictions that you found within your academic career. And it runs counter, doesn't it, to your own experiences. And like myself, I've had precognitive experiences, and I know that these things are real. So can you give us some examples of the things that frustrated you initially during your academic career in terms of how neurology is looked at these days and what the rules are in terms of the materialist reductionist model?
So let me back up just quickly. Although it is popular these days to say that precognition suggests that materialism can't be the case, or the reductionist model can't be the case, there are models of precognition where honestly, precognition is orthogonal. So that's why I backed off when I said things that run counter to materialism, because you really can create a model. In fact, I have a materialistic model for precognition, but it requires the existence of consciousness being something other than materialism. So it's just that it includes material. Anyway, it doesn't matter. Point is, we have to be careful to not assume that all anomalous experiences imply non-materialism or post-materialism. So that's just a thought. However, there's plenty of evidence for post-materialism. Okay, having said that, so I don't know about neurology because that's a medical discipline, but neuroscience, which is a research discipline, is what I was in. And I'll give you a couple of examples of my experiences that I felt were fairly appalling. At one point, I was having conversations with graduate students. I was having a conversation with graduate students about a dream that I had. I was like, I had this amazing dream. What do you think it means? And several of them just turned to me and said, well, dreams are just random firings of your neurons. So what do you mean? What does it mean? And I was like, what? Because I was raised in a household. Well, my mother was a therapist. My father was a physicist, and neither of them thought that dreams were meaningless. So that was the first time I'd ever heard that. I was just taken aback. I thought, good Lord, the whole reason I'm in neuroscience is because I'm fascinated by dreams. I'm fascinated by the mind. You're telling me that that's bullshit, So that was appalling. But that was a graduate student. So I thought, it's just a graduate student. Like, maybe they'll learn more. And so, but the card that sort of tipped everything over for me was when I was talking with some graduate students, and a faculty member whom I respected came into the library where we were having a journal club meeting. And he said, I feel sorry for you all. And he was serious. There's just going to be bread and butter science to do after this, just incremental stuff, because we basically understand how the brain works and we know how the brain leads to the mind. So it's not much to do. I was like, what? And then finally I had another, and then I think the day I left, someone said, oh, I heard you're leaving. I heard you're just taking your master's, because I was in a PhD program. I heard you're taking a terminal master's and you're going, and what's going on? And I said, I said, how there's this thing here where everyone says, like, laughs at something called dualism, where, there's a mental reality and there's a physical reality, and they both actually exist. And he said, yeah, and he laughed and stuff. And I said, yeah, I think I'm either a dualist or I might be a monist. I might actually think that what exists is the mental stuff. And he's like, oh my God. And he freaked out. And I just thought, wow, I am stepping on some kind of taboo here that I wasn't even aware existed, because I was, so I think there's this like pyramid of status in the sciences. And at the top is like physics and mathematics. And at the bottom is sociology, right? Anthropology. Psychology is maybe slightly up. I'm not sure. Those kind of swap at times. And then you got, biology, chemistry, right? Okay, so that's your pyramid. The higher you are on the pyramid, I think the more free you are to be able to think strange thoughts or thoughts that go against the paradigm. The lower you are on the pyramid, the more you have to pretend that, no, we're super scientific. And what that means when I say pretend, because sociologists and anthropologists are scientific, it's a scientific discipline, right? But when I say pretend, what I mean is to adopt what is considered socially the rules of the higher levels. Meanwhile, the higher levels don't play by those rules because they don't have to. They're not worried about losing status. So anyway, that's what I observed.
It's interesting though, because I'm reminded of, and you're probably very much aware of it, I think it was 1896 or something like that, when Albert Michelson, Michelson-Morley experiment, made some grandiose statement at the opening, I think it was at the University of Chicago, I think, where he turned round and made some statement quoting, I think, Lord Rayleigh, to turn around and say that we only need to calculate to the 6th decimal point and that everything else has already been discovered. But there's a wonderful little background story to that I always love, that there was a young student in Germany in the 1870s, and he couldn't decide whether he wanted to be a musician or wanted to be a physicist. And he went to his professor, and his professor said the same kind of thing and said, look, there's no point in becoming a physicist because we're almost there. I suggest that you go away and become a musician. Fortunately, this particular young man decided to become a physicist, who happened to be Max Planck. And of course, Max Planck in 1900, December 1900, made his act of frustration, as he said, when he couldn't explain the black body radiation issue and the infrared ultraviolet disaster, and
which led to quantum mechanics. I mean, which led to the recognition that we are not all tied up.
Exactly, you know. And the thing is, this, as you rightly say, this happened all that time ago, and yet still there are the sciences that are still stuck in this worldview that consciousness is just an epiphenomenon of brain behavior, of electricity mixing in some way with chemicals, and it creates you and it creates me. And it's clearly irrational and nonsensical. I sometimes find, people like Daniel Dennett and the limited materialists, and I think, what are these guys on? Like the Churchlands? And you think you're in denial of your own consciousness and your own.
Yeah. I mean, he's often been asked at conferences. I was at a conference, the Science of Consciousness conference. He and David Chalmers have this conversation all the time, and David says, so do you think you're conscious? And he says, well, I know that I have the illusion of consciousness. But of course, illusions are experiences, so I don't know.
I'd love to witness a debate between Chalmers and Dennett. That would be to die for, I would imagine. Because
yeah, it is. Well, it's a slam dunk. It's rough. Yeah,
I can imagine. So effectively, for your background, can you tell me a little bit about your own personal precognitive experiences, and then we'll move on to, because it's something I argue, the orthogonal model of precognition, but we'll touch on to that in a few minutes' time. But can you give me a few examples of your own personal experiences of precognition?
Sure. Let's see. I'm trying to think of ones that I haven't said on interviews, and so I just would like this to be new and interesting. So I don't think I've talked much about the one I had. Oh, that's just too grandiose. I have a bunch of them. All right, so I'll just tell you a simple one. Here's a mundane one. I have this dream that my friend Johnny, who frankly I haven't seen in 15 years, and I'm not close friends with, but he's wearing this old-fashioned bowler hat, and he's like in a black and white, like I see him in black and white, like an old or a sepia tone kind of look, like I'm watching an old movie. And he's sort of like looking at me like this and being jaunty, and I'm like, that's the whole dream. So just useless. And then the next day I see on Facebook, there he is, he's changed his cover picture to him in a bowler hat and a sepia toned picture, looking very old fashioned, and so basically just like the dream. So those kind of dreams are most of my precognitive experiences, are these mundane sort of, my husband calls them free samples. It's just like a free sample from the universe saying, hi, here I am. Most of them. And then some of them are profound and make me feel helpless. Like the one I had a couple of years ago about a bombing in Kuwait City, Kuwait, at noontime prayers. And I had the dream the day before it happened. the night where it could have been happening at that same time, I'm not sure. So it could also be telepathic, but my experience was, I had it the night before I learned of it. So my experience was of precognition. So those things can be confusing to disentangle in spontaneous experiences. But anyway, I saw the whole thing. I saw the noontime prayers. I saw the praying. I saw the bomb. And there was a date that flashed on the screen of my dream. That was the date of the next morning of the event. And that was the first time I had dreamt of something. I've dreamt of profound things in my own life that have helped me guide my life, but that was the first time I dreamt of a world event that was devastating that I could do nothing to shift. And so that's actually motivating for me. That's part of why I wrote the book Premonition Code, which is my newer book that came out in October. I'm wanting more and more people to recognize these abilities, normalize them, start to practice them. And so the other piece that I would like to tell are two other types of precognitive experiences beyond dreams. So since I was a kid, I've been having these dreams, but also I've been having precognitive compulsions, which is the name that I give to the experience where some part of you says, I have to go do X now, whatever X is. And then and it's irrational and you don't know why it is, but you feel compelled to do it. So when you go do X, it turns out that was a really important thing to do. So in the book, I talk about this guy who is, was in the military. He's a friend of mine, and he really, really, really all of a sudden wanted iced tea. And he was in Afghanistan, and it was like 110 degrees. He was in a bunker, and he just wanted iced tea, and with a level of urgency that he thought was ridiculous, because he told himself to get iced tea, he had to walk away, go, half a mile to somewhere else where there was the iced tea, and then come back. It was really hot out, and he was sitting on a cooler of water, so he could just have water. But no, there was this incredible urge for iced tea. And at some point he just gave in and said, this is ridiculous, but I'm doing it because maybe I need a break or something. So he gets up and he goes to the place to get the iced tea, and he comes back and his whole area is quarantined or whatever, roped off. And he finds out what happened, and that what happened was a rocket hit right where he was sitting. It didn't go off because it wasn't fused correctly, but it could have killed him because it hit right where he was sitting. And he thought, okay, that's why I wanted to get the iced tea. So those kind of experiences I've had. And I tell about one of those in the book, so I don't want to go over that here. But a third type that I've had is when I started training myself in controlled precognition. So people who have lots of precognitive experiences, it feels really valuable to start training yourself, almost like meditation. You sit down at a desk, get sheets of paper, or some people don't sit down at a desk. Sometimes some people do it standing up, and they're doing it with movements of their body. But in any case, you set aside some time every day to try to predict a future event. You have a plan for how that event will be predicted, whether it's a random number generator or something else. In the case of the Premonition Code, we have a website where people can, for free, predict a future event and train themselves in this way. But basically, it becomes a practice of getting feedback from the universe. Was I correct or not? And it's almost like meditation or ecstatic dance or any kind of experience where you're in engagement with the universe. And that's the kind of precognition that I love to practice now. So.
Very, very interesting. I would imagine that you're probably unaware of a lot of my own work. I wrote a book a few years ago called The Labyrinth of Time.
I am not only, why would you think I'm unaware? I have your book. You sent it to me. I read your book and I loved it. Are you kidding me?
Oh, right, thank you. I tend to assume that I'm this little guy over in the UK beavering away and nobody really knows who I am. But
that's false.
But it was fascinating you using the term you used. I mean, in my last book, I used the term, I've just written a book on J.B. Priestley and J.W. Dunn.
Nice.
The work of J.W. Dunn.
Of course.
Time. And I call them mundane duns
yes.
for the same reason. We have these incredible precognitive sensations or feelings that seem so banal, and as you say, it's almost like the universe is telling us something. Now, in which case, putting the skeptic's hat on, what's your reaction to people like Richard Wiseman, who would turn around and say, well, it's the law of large numbers. Effectively, you have a precognitive experience, and either it's the law of large numbers, or it's confirmation bias, or it's
Yeah.
attention bias. So how would you dismiss those arguments and say that, for me, that's an inadequate explanation for this?
Oh, I wouldn't. When it comes to spontaneous precognition, it always could be confirmation bias. It could always be, I mean, he's absolutely right. Spontaneous precognition is what makes people motivated to test precognition in the laboratory, where you can decide how many trials you have, you could do statistics, you can control what is generating the future event. So that's why we've spent decades in the laboratory doing precognitive experiments, so that we could actually see if it is the law of large numbers, see if it is confirmation bias. It's not. So now it could still be that somehow out in the, and this is not, I mean, it's some percentage of the case, it is going to be confirmation bias out in the spontaneous world. And even in the laboratory, the problem is in the laboratory, the problem for Richard Wiseman is that even in the laboratory, at a rate higher than expected by chance, again and again, you can't use confirmation bias to explain when a random number generator produces something in the future after you've already made your behavior or response or your physiological measure. And those two things correlate. It's just, you can't, there's not a way to do that. So, and he knows that. I mean, he's married to a precognition researcher, you know, so he knows that.
Yeah, because it's intriguing, isn't it, as well? I know that one of the intriguing experiments that were done was the Bierman and Radin experiments, you know, with the skin conductance and the anticipation of a horrible picture. You know, they show a load of nice photographs, and effectively somebody, where they would, it seems, within a few seconds be able to anticipate, or the skin would react in a particular way, give off certain ions or something, in which case the person was precognizing subliminally the fact that something awful was going to take place, so they're going to see a horrible photograph. Now, I've argued that you could counter-argue that and say it could be the gambler's fallacy, you know, the idea that the gambler feels because red has not come up for so many throws, they don't do the statistical analysis saying it's still 50-50, but they jump to the conclusion that, you know, the next one is bound to be a horrific incident or a horrific picture. But to me, these things are powerful evidence. Now, it was interesting what you just said then, that
Wait, can we time out for a second?
Yeah.
Just a couple things to clear up. So Bierman and Radin, it's easy to conflate their experiments, but Radin did a bunch of experiments with skin conductance, so that has to do with not ions, well, I suppose they're ions, but basically, yeah, changes in sweat, right? The conductance of your skin. So yeah, it is ions, but in a different way. And then Bierman came along and did it in fMRI. But Bierman and Radin did the early study together. Is that what you're referring to?
Yeah, the one, 1999, I think it was, something like that.
Or 97, maybe. Yeah. Anyway, yeah. So, okay, cool. So good. And then the other thing is, expectation bias, gambler's fallacy. Yeah. So actually, I thought the same thing. And I did some simulations, and I showed that the number of trials that you would require to, the number of participants that would be required to wash out any kind of expectation bias as a result, it ends up being around 25 or so. So most of these studies had more than that. But furthermore, I went and did a study on gambler's fallacy to understand how it works. And it turns out it only shows up in certain conditions with a binary task. Yeah. And then I decided I was very concerned about gambler's fallacy. So then I went and did a series of experiments where I just had one trial. So there is no series of events from which you could even have a fallacy, right? So there's no heads, tails, heads, 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 heads. Oh, the next one's got to be tails, right? It's just one trial. It's just tails or heads. And I still found very good evidence for precognition in physiology, which is called presentiment. So I'm pretty confident that that's not a good explanation.
Wow, that is fantastic to hear. I mean, obviously, I need to get hold of your new book, because you seem to be doing some fascinating areas here in terms of precognition. Now, one of the things you mentioned earlier on was, because I haven't read your book, this is just fascinating to me, and we can actually come back to Transcendent Mind, but this is an area that really, really shakes my tree and something I'm really intrigued in. So when you were using the term an orthogonal explanation, I don't know if you know, but I wrote a biography of Philip K. Dick, the American science fiction writer.
Oh, yeah. He was totally precognitive in all those stories, yeah.
Totally. But what was very intriguing was, I don't know if you've read his exegesis, but his exegesis was he made all these notes over a period of time when he went through his experiences in 1974. He kept notes on them, and one of the things he kept using was this concept of orthogonal time, a time that runs at a right angle to this time. And it is fascinating that you're using the same terminology as Philip K. Dick was. So could you explain to the guys out there exactly what you mean by orthogonal time? And I'm intrigued myself to know what you mean when you use the term orthogonal in terms of an orthogonal explanation of presentience.
Okay, yeah, okay. So first of all, I'll explain to the guys and gals. And second, when I was talking about orthogonality, I was talking, so first of all, orthogonal means on a directly opposing axis, so like 90 degrees to the other axis. And then when I was talking about orthogonality, I was talking about that whether or not precognition exists is completely orthogonal to materialism in my view. In other words, what I was saying, so it wasn't orthogonal time, although I want to talk with you about orthogonal time. But what I was saying is that on the axis of materialism to sort of post-materialism or non-materialism or whatever you want to make this axis about, precognition is like this. In other words, does precognition exist? No, it does not. It doesn't. There's no implications there. It's completely orthogonal. That's what I was saying.
Okay.
Yeah. So to me, you can't go from precognition is a real phenomenon, which is in my mind totally shown to be the case, to that materialism is wrong. So I think there's other better evidence for materialism not being right. So anyway, having said that, orthogonal time, I didn't know that he wrote about that. That's really cool. It's what I've been thinking about for the last 3 weeks. So now it's unsurprising to me that we're having this conversation, I guess.
Yeah, no, it was really intriguing how he developed all this. And I'll be interviewing William Sarrell, who was one of his close friends at that time, on this show sometime next year. And William was the guy that was behind a lot of the theology that Philip K. Dick wrote in some of his novels. And they worked very closely together on this. So it's going to be an intriguing conversation we're going to have there as well. But clearly, Philip K. Dick, in terms of the way in which it seemed that he found himself in the circumstances of his own novels in his own future. He effectively wrote a novel and then found himself living the circumstances of the novel. Yeah. But have you heard the case of the fact that he predicted his own death as well?
No, but you know what? I'll tell you, I'm sure he did. Of course, he was a really skilled precognitive, but I'll tell you, I end up finding that conversations that I have about stories about precognition, they end up getting boring. And the reason is because it's like once you just acknowledge, like, look, scientifically we know precognition exists, it's like a bunch of people talking about being able to play Mary Had a Little Lamb on the piano. It's like, so like just teach yourself to be a concert pianist. Like what are we doing here? We're just trying to convince ourselves that this stuff is real. It is real. So what are we going to do with it? So to me, great that he predicted his own death, but so many people have, and that's because it's a real thing. Because it's a human skill,
So what is your model? Have you got some kind of an attempt at trying to explain exactly what is taking place here when somebody has a precognitive event? Mm-hmm. What do you think is going on? What is this telling you the nature of reality?
Well, what I think I don't know. I'm an empiricist, and so my models tend to be interesting and yet always trying to lean towards something that's testable, which tends to be frustrating for true theoreticians. So I'll tell you what I think, and then a true theoretician can be pissed off. But what I think is that don't stop what I think. What I sense is that precognition is just showing us. Let me back up. I don't think that what needs to be explained is precognition. I think that what needs to be explained is the generally much more pervasive sense that people have that events are only moving in one direction in time. I think that that's the anomaly. I think that that physical events outside of, I think there is a physical world outside of consciousness. And when I say outside, I mean like that we're not aware of. I don't mean that necessarily a consciousness isn't involved in it, but anything that we're not aware of with our conscious mind, I think necessarily is time symmetric. So the information is going in both directions just as a matter of course. And at the very small subset of things of which we are conscious, the act of observation itself creates a linear order of time. So of course we're going to get some bleed through from future events because information is traveling in both directions in time in this reality of which we're not conscious, and our unconscious minds can actually pick up on that. So the only part, the very small part of the world that has this opinion about linear order is our very weak and very serial conscious, like individual conscious experience. So I think that's what it's telling us.
Okay, because again, you know, one of the areas that intrigues me here, I think it's John Kramer, the quantum physicist, who has something called the transactional model of quantum physics.
You know who writes about that model much more clearly is Ruth Kastner.
Really?
Yeah,
okay.
So like I find John Kramer's stuff totally opaque, and you read Ruth Kastner and you're like, ah, that's what he was saying. Of course, she changes it a little bit because she's a philosopher. But
yeah, but even so, you know, the implications there are quite intriguing, aren't they? You know, and Kramer, I've read some of his work, and it is very interesting, and it's very, very challenging, but he's coming from a particular viewpoint. In terms of this, have you come across the work, I'm sure you have, of Diane Hennessy Powell?
Oh, sure. I'm friends with her. But wait, let's go back to John Kramer.
Okay.
The other, so we should tell people why that's interesting.
Yes,
in
please
this
do.
context. So the reason that transactional interpretation is interesting in this context is this idea that there's an agreement between the past and the future that they call the quantum handshake. This agreement between the past and the future on what is going to occur in the present. And that's really interesting. Although, as Ruth Kastner explains in her books and in her writings, this is not the past and future that exists in classical conscious time. This is the past and future that exists in sort of quantum land time. So it's a whole different deal than what you would expect. And then it's worth, if you're interested in that kind of stuff, it's worth checking out the two-state vector formalism, TSVF, because a similar idea about the past and the future being constraints on the present, but in a different way. So those are different interpretations of quantum mechanics. They both have this idea. Frankly, things are a lot easier to explain when you can use the future and the past both as guides of explanation to what occurs. And that's the point. You can solve a lot of interesting problems. But Diane Hennessy Powell, let's talk about her.
Yeah, I mean, some of the work she's been doing, again, she's been a previous guest on this show, and I know the work she was doing with the young Indian girl who seemingly they thought was a mathematical savant, and they subsequently discovered, no, she wasn't a mathematical savant, she was actually reading her mother's mind. And therefore, because her mother was a mathematician, she was obviously wanting to come across in a positive way. But what's your interpretation of Diane's work? Because I find it absolutely revolutionary, and I think very, very intriguing. And I haven't spoken to Diane for around about a year, but I'd be really interested to know how her project is developing. But what's your take on her work, and what's your thoughts on it?
I think she's amazing. I think it's very interesting. My memory of the Indian girl was that her mother was looking at a calculator to try to find answers to bigger problems. And then when she switched to, or was it Diane, one of them, switched to scientific notation, all of a sudden the girl starts responding in scientific notation. And that's when they realized it was she was reading her mind. My concern is, and I've shared this with Diane, so it's no surprise to her, is that because she's not trained in empirical methods about how to deal with sensory shielding, that there could be subtle cues that no one could pick up on consciously that might be, like breathing cues or other, I mean, it's hard to explain. It's 8-digit response to something. And so I want to believe, but I want to only believe if the proper controls are put in place. And so I've been talking with her about that. So that would be really fun to do. I think the last time we talked, we're looking for funding to do that. So if anyone's interested, let me know.
Absolutely, because this is such important work, and of course it ties into the fact that this child is autistic or experiences autism as well, and I think I'm right in saying is non-verbal. As I understood the story, I think it was one of the research students that was working with the child who got bored with some of the questions she was asking the child, and I think she thought in her own mind what the answer to the question would be in binary notation, and the child then typed binary notation on her keyboard, because I think she communicates by using keyboards in some way.
Well, so there's multiple children. I mean, so the thing is, she's looked at multiple children, so we probably are conflating stories. The best thing is to talk with her.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, the whole storyline is quite intriguing here. So, in terms of your work and the way you're going forward now, in terms of your book, can you tell us a little bit about what is shaking your tree at the moment and the things that you're really interested in terms of your own research and interests, and indeed your new book? So please tell me more about this new book. I'm really, really quite excited about it now. So if you can tell us a little bit more about where you go with it without giving it enough away to make people to want to go out and read it.
Wait, shaking the tree, is that a positive thing, or is that a thing that's shaking me up, or is that a thing like in America we have this shaking me up thing, that's something making you nervous, but shaking the tree, is that like, oh, that's how the fruit comes out?
Yeah, that's right. If you shake the tree, you will have effectively things will drop, and then you can analyze what you drop, effectively. So it's a statement.
Okay, great. Okay,
we are two people confused by different ways of terminology, the English and American English, possibly.
Yeah, I like it. Shaking my tree. What fruit is coming out? Okay. I was literally just shaking an apple tree yesterday, so that's why I thought it was kind of funny.
Well, there you
go. Yeah. So Premonition Code is all about, so it's very different from Transcendent Mind, which is a scholarly work, right? It's almost like a textbook, and several courses are using it for a textbook. So and it was published by the American Psychology Association and peer reviewed and everything. So that's that. Premonition Code is not that. It's for a lay audience. It's hopefully for a wide audience. It's published with Teresa Chung as my co-author. She's in the UK, and she normally writes books that are without science, and she wanted to write a book that involved science because she hears all these stories about precognition. And then when she met me, she said, "Wait a minute, you're doing the science of this. This is cool." So we wrote the book together, and my motivation was to normalize precognition for people, let people know that there's a scientific basis for it, let people know that we don't understand how time works, but there's definitely a certain amount of confusion, so precognition doesn't seem unreasonable in any way, whether you're a materialist or otherwise. And then I wanted to spend a chunk of the book talking about how to actually train yourself to be precognitive. And then I wanted to spend a chunk of the book talking about what happens when you do train yourself to be precognitive. And that's almost my favorite part of the book. Although I love training people, I now have a side business where I work with John Vivanco, who is a really remarkable precog and remote viewer. And we train people to be precognitive, most of them already have quite good skills. But anyway, that's just fun. I love that kind of teaching because it combines the science and the practice. So, but you can read about all that, how to train yourself to be precognitive in the book, or you can go to the premonitioncode.com and click on positive precog training and learn about it there. So all that's kind of out there. The piece that I want to get more out there is about the changes that people experience as they start to continually make a positive and loving relationship or connection between their present and their future selves, and their present and their past selves. And the experience that I have and other people have had is it's a strengthening, empowering, relaxing experience, because first of all, you're not alone. So you're never alone. You have your past and future selves who feel real to you as you learn to communicate with them. And you feel the full power of who you are because of this strength. And I think of it as like a necklace in time. And each moment of ourselves is like a bead on the string. But when you make these connections between past and future selves, you're really spending less time being the beads and more time being this necklace, this string, the connector. And that feels like a really positive shift that if it's done right, with ethics and with appropriate care and respect for the unknown, it feels it feels to me more powerful than meditation. Meditation is very powerful. To me, it feels more powerful than meditation in the following way. You're getting feedback all the time from the universe in the form of an actual event that's been picked by a random number generator. So you can't tell yourself lies about, oh, that's what I saw, or that's, you know what I mean? It gets rid of all that stuff. If you're not able to predict the feedback, you were not connecting well with your future self. So you have to learn from that. You have to be able to fail to do better. right? You have to be able to fail so that you can see the parts of what's true, what's not true, let the other stuff fall away. It doesn't mean that anyone ever gets to 100% accuracy, because that doesn't seem to be how it works, even with the best, but it's a constant process of learning and dancing and getting to know your own mind and getting to know the universe and learning about your unconscious mind. And to me, it's just the best. I love it. I can't say anything negative about it, except that it can be destabilizing if you happen to be really good when you start out, and you can get delusional and think, oh, I'm God or something. You know what I mean? I'm omniscient or whatever. And that can be destabilizing and can cause delusions. But if you're like me and you're kind of mediocre or a little slightly above average to start out, turns out it's okay, because then you slowly climb.
This is very, very interesting in that one of the areas that I've written about in the past is what is generally known, I think it's the ling saria, the long body. And the idea that, of course, we are all ourselves. We are all ourselves from the moment of our birth to the moment of our deaths. And I loved your analogy about the beads on a string. I think that's the best one I've heard. I've struggled for many years to actually come up with an analogy like that. One of the best ones I ever saw was I spoke with Professor Jeff Forshaw many years ago before an event at the National Gallery and the National Theatre in London for a performance of Time and the Conways by J.B. Priestley, funnily enough. And the theatre producer wanted to get across the idea of how we are all ourselves, or we are all our lives, because there's a famous speech in that play. One of the characters says that we are all our lives, we are all ourselves, we are all just slices in terms of block time, Minkowski's block time, we're just slices. But the producer did a wonderful thing. He was, I don't know, do you know Edward Murbridge, the guy that used to do a series? Murbridge was a fascinating guy. He was a professional photographer, and he was the guy that first found that horses, when they run, all their feet lift off the ground at the same time.
Yeah, because he did that.
And you see the old paintings by people like Stubbs and everything. The horse doesn't seem to. There was the issue whether they've. And what he did was he did a series of static image photographs of a running horse, and he was able to prove that all their feet were off the ground. But what he also did was a series of photographs of people moving and moving through time, which is again very, very similar to I can't think, Julian Barber.
That's the Nows.
The Nows. Now, what the director did was he had a series. He had the main actress, the Kate Conway, and she was standing in a darkened room, and they had a series of other actresses, all in the same dress, all with slightly different positions, and then they used a strobe light, and they put it across the stage, and the illusion of movement was incredible, and it really got across the idea of that's what time is. And of course, from this, it's your concept. You're talking about orthogonal time, and the idea, if we view our job, our lives from a position of orthogonal time at a right angle to our own lives, we would be in a position as the character in the movie Interstellar is. There's the Tesseract sequence in the movie where he sees his daughter's life in 3D running through time. And it's so exciting to come across another writer that is going down similar routes. Because I think this is the solution, So
I don't know. I mean, I think it's, I don't know. I do not think it's helpful at this stage, because I think we're at an early stage of understanding time. I don't think it's helpful to think that any one solution is the solution. I think it's helpful to explore different solutions, what they solve and what they don't solve. And I think it's dangerous to say this is the solution or that's the solution. I think we have to get used to ambiguity for a while. It's a strong feeling I have that, like, the big mistake that people make all the time is like, oh, we have to choose this. You don't have to choose anything. We don't actually have to understand any of this stuff. So it's a luxury to be able to try to think about it, but to function in the world, we don't need to understand any of this stuff. You could become a skilled piano player without understanding how your motor system, your motor cortex is, feeding information into your hand. So I really want to be clear that I think the next step in humanity, yes, let's keep it trying to understand time, But we don't need to foreclose early on any kind of conclusions. We can develop a relationship with time in a new way that helps humanity using precognition without understanding everything theoretical about it. It's a masculine model that says you have to understand.
Yes, I agree. I agree with
Indeed.
So you touched upon this before then. So what do you think, how we could use this developing skill? How could we use it constructively in terms of how humanity develops? You know, you touched upon that earlier. So where do you think we go with this?
Well, I think it's a revolution first of all, it's in two ways. So in one way of just the individual change that this creates in people, where they're less focused on I have to have everything now, because this is the only moment that I actually believe exists. So switching to the connected piece creates people who are much more capable of existing in a place that's less about meeting their immediate needs. So I think that's really important. And makes the people more powerful and more willing to have a voice because they don't feel so weak. So I think both of those changes are really important. Those are individual sort of interpersonal or personal changes or spiritual changes, whatever you want to call them. Then at a practical global level, besides the changes that will come from people changing in that way, you have the use of precognition in every area of our lives. So you have the use of precognition with a group, in the book we call it the Positive Precog Council in the UN, where you have a group of people who are scientifically vetted precogs, some of whom are really good at dealing with predicting future terrorist strikes, some that are really good at predicting environmental changes, some that are good with weather patterns, some that are good with economic things. And you have them doing their work alongside artificial intelligence and policy wonks and everything. So it's just another source of information that gets used to help humanity avoid things that are going to be destructive and move towards things that are positive. When I was a little kid, I was thinking a lot about time, and I had this dream. I had a series of explanatory dreams, and one of them was that it was like I had a narrator. It was like a movie. I was worried about, I was in the Cold War. I must have been about 9 or so, or 10. And I was worried a lot for some reason about nuclear war. And in the dream, they showed me a room, and that the room was a chair. And they said, now, if there's a room, they said, time is a room. And if there's a chair in the room, if you want to avoid bumping into the chair when you walk across the room, you have to know the chair is there so you can avoid it. And so I woke up and I thought, oh, that's right. That's like a nuclear war. And it made me much more relaxed when I woke up. I thought, as long as we can see that there's this possibility of a future event, we can avoid it. And so that's what I think is really powerful about precognition. You would also have what I call the precog economy. You would also have, I sort of laugh because people find that sort of new and unusual, but I actually think that will happen, is that we'll have a very different precog economy. You'll find people who are normally discounted in the current economy, or very sensitive, and who are likely precognitive, having large roles. For instance, working for a hospital to determine each week what the schedule should be for doctors based on admissions that are coming in. You could have people teaching children about precognition and how to work on their precognitive skills at the all the way through K through 12, and in college. You'd have people working with law enforcement agencies. So you just basically, there's no area of life where it would be helpful to know the future and the possibilities that you'd like to avoid or move towards. I mean, it's a completely missing part of our economy right now. I don't mean to say that people aren't doing this for money. People are, but it's just under wraps. Corporations are hiring precogs to do all sorts of things. It's under wraps. They don't talk about it. And I'm wanting to bring it to the light of day and just acknowledge, here's a skill that people are using, and it's not taboo. It's not scientifically incorrect. It's really valuable, and it needs to be valued.
Again, intriguing in that, of course, in my mind there, it was resonating with me again about Philip K. Dick's novel stroke movie Minority Report, using the precogs in terms of pre-crime, and how you can stop a crime happening and you will still arrest the person even though the crime hasn't been committed. And that begs the next question, doesn't it, effectively, that as one precognitive friend of mine said, who had experienced temporal lobe epilepsy and in aura states would be able to see his immediate future. And I once said to him, well, if you know what's going to happen, you can prove your precognitive skills by turning around and saying, you're now going to say this. But as he said to me, very wisely, I mean, this guy literally is now a rocket scientist, and he said to me, that's very difficult to say, because if I turn around to you and said, I've just had a precognition about what you're going to say, your reaction will not be what I envisioned you would say, but would be, that's very interesting. What did you think I was going to say? So you almost bring about an alternate future, that you've avoided the problem, which of course then suggests, is this suggestive of Everett's many worlds interpretation, that every outcome of every subatomic particle's collapse engenders another universe, and that's how you can avoid the future. And does that future still exist in an alternate future? It's just you've changed the travel of this particular wave consciousness, this wave collapse into an alternate reality. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, but he never did that. He never turned to the person and said, I think you're going to say this. Right.
No, he never tried.
Yeah. So I think that the Hugh Everett thing is really interesting. And my attitude about it is fairly much like it's an egoic fantasy, because we want to make sure we have free will. We want to make sure the ego wants to make sure it's in control and has these choices, which I think is false. So.
No, that's a very good point, isn't it? The idea that we don't have free will, but of course, neurologically, the experiments have shown, the bet and the intention to flex and everything else evidently shows that. I saw one argument is Dylan Haynes in the Netherlands, I think, is working on this, where somewhere in the region of 6 seconds before some of the experiments he's shown.
Yeah, soon it'll have 8 seconds before. Although I'll tell you that I've done, it depends on the task. But I'll tell you that I've done a Benjamin Libet-like experiment using EEG and pressing a left and a right finger in different circumstances, depending on the stimuli, which are randomly predicted. And it's clear that at the same range, 550 milliseconds, at the same location prior to the response, so as the same location in time, I mean, according to Libet, I could predict what the future response would be, but in this case, it's not their choice about what they press. The choice is based on the future stimulus. And it makes me think that Libet's effect is actually precognitive, but that's not being considered precognitive, right? So anyway, while I don't necessarily believe in free will, although I go back and forth every day, I certainly thinking that maybe Libet's experiment is about precognition and not about free will. So anyway, it's a thought. But yeah, I think that there's something in the multiple universes. Another way to go with the multiple universe thing, the Hugh Everett thing, is to say that it's egoic to think it's not true, because you want to have a single ego that doesn't split, right? So my whole thing about it being egoic was just that was something that I said in the moment. That's a flip thing, and it can easily be flipped on its head. It wasn't a logical thought. It wasn't a well-reasoned thought. It is a feeling I have. It's a bias I have. So yeah, what I sense is that none of that stuff right now is testable. And we have so many things we can test. So let's test those things. It almost feels masturbatory to talk about all those different interpretations that we're just not there yet. I just feel like we have to get it that we're babies. Sorry, I'm just not a theorist. We're just babies, and we don't know like some really basic things, like how does the brain actually interrelate with the mind? Like we don't know that. Like that's a really basic thing. We don't understand what people are walking around calling energy. That is some real thing. Like people say, oh, this negative energy, positive energy, vibration. They're talking about something real. We don't know what that is scientifically. So like we're idiots. And so to have these far-ranging discussions is just like, part of me is like, oh, it's really cool. Part of me is like, oh, it's like babies saying,
Yeah, we are dangerous of hubris here and coming up with all kinds of ideas because we don't know. Rather, like in the late 1890s, just going the example we started in the 1890s, science had absolutely no concept in any shape or form
Right.
of the results of quantum physics, and it
Right.
could be a new science right around the corner that we're just not aware of.
Well,
And
it's not that there couldn't. It's not that there could be, it's that there is a new science right around the corner, of course, because there has to be, because there's too many things right now. I mean, that's one thing I will say for sure. There's a new science right around the corner that we're not aware of because there has to be.
It's Thomas Kuhn, it's paradigm change. It is inevitable because, you know, there are so many things that don't fit in. I sometimes feel we're almost like the medieval schoolmen with their epicycles to explain retrograde motion of the outer planets, because we have this kind of, there's an artist, a UK artist called Heath Robinson, that used to draw these incredibly ornate mechanisms to explain things.
Yeah.
And it's what we're doing now. I sometimes feel that an awful lot of quantum physics is trying to explain things that we're not even at first base of understanding. And because we're not, we create these models that are so non-logical. And what I find refreshing about what you're doing is you're taking the Marcello Trui concept of extraordinary claims need extraordinary claims need extraordinary proofs. And you're going back right to the empirical viewpoint of saying, let's just see what the experimentation tells us. And that's incredibly refreshing and so important. And so important going forward, isn't it?
Well, it's my nature, so I can't claim credit for it. I mean, it's just I was born to be this way. So yeah, I'm glad it's refreshing. But if it weren't refreshing, I'd still be doing it.
Absolutely. Okay, well, I find it absolutely amazing. That is, we've been at it for an hour and it's just flashed by. It's just absolutely fun. That is the quickest consciousness hour I think I've ever experienced in terms of stretching of time.
So just same experience, but I have this experience every time I talk with someone about time, and it makes me think that just talking about time produces like this time travel thing.
It's like St. Augustine said, wasn't it? You know, I understand time completely when I'm not thinking about it. And then I start to think about it, it just disappears because I cannot even begin to understand what it actually is, you know, and that is the thing. Right, because time is running out. So if people want to contact you, want to look into your work, can you tell us contact points and everything else, websites, anything you want? Okay.
Sure. So mossbridgeinstitute.com. So that's just my last name. mossbridgeinstitute.com is my major website where I have all my books listed and all my events and such. And then the premonitioncode.com is the website where you can go to positive precog training, that link, and you can sign up. It's free, and go at it and use the random number generator to predict future events and see if you can predict them. And those two are probably the most important ones right now. Yeah, because Mossbridge Institute just keeps people up to date on whatever I'm doing. If you're interested in me in particular. And in terms of contacting me, both of those have contact us links that go to my assistant so she can sort through everything.
Wonderful, thank you very much. And your ears must have been burning because I was at an event in Westminster last week, and I was chatting with Jude Currivan. I was saying that I was interviewing because Jude is my next guest in January.
Yeah, right. Yeah, you said that. Yeah, that's so cool. That's going to be awesome.
Really,
thank you.
The synergy is going to be perfect because, you know, it's just rolling on from there in terms of, because you guys are doing some fascinating work. And I'm just so both humbled and excited and delighted that there are people like you out there that are doing the kind of work you're doing, because without the kind of work you're doing, we're just floundering in the dark. You know, we are looking for a black cat that isn't there in the darkness. And I think it is so important, the kind of work you're doing, and it is so just important. It just is. So I would personally thank you very much for what you're doing. It is really important to me and many other people, I think. Thanks
so much. But Anthony, what you're doing is at least equally, if not more important in terms of spreading the word. I mean, so I think we're on equal footing here with appreciating each other's existence. So thank you very much. Thank you. Wonderful. Okay, thank you very much. So as I mentioned, the next show will be Jude Currivan, and for my wonderful guest, Julia Mossbridge. Delightful hour, really absolutely wonderful. Thank you very much. We must have you on the show again sometime soon. Okay, thank you. Fun. Thanks, Anthony.
Good.